Number 5. Drugged spiders. In 1995, a few unfortunate spiders were given various common drugs out of their will. Now, they are slaves to the drugs given by the bad humans. Well, not really, but it is true that in 1995, NASA scientists have conducted a study to see what various drugs do to spiders and their ability to spin their webs. They continued the experiments done by J.A. Nathanson in 1984, who continued another experiment by Swiss pharmacologist Peter N. Witt from 1948. They administered the drugs by either dropping the drug solution on the spider's mouth, or by feeding them drugged flies, or even by using a fine syringe. In 1948, H.M. Peters, a zoologist, was studying spiders and their web-building techniques, but to his annoyance, spiders usually build their webs around 2 to 5 in the morning. This was a problem because he needed to film their web building, but he often fell asleep. So he enlisted help from Peter N. Witt, which suggested using drugs in hopes for the spiders to change their web building schedule. Surprisingly for them, rather than the spiders changing the time they spin their webs, they instead change the patterns of their webs. Here are some examples of what their webs look like on different drugs. Let's start with no drugs. You could see how beautiful and detailed the web is. On caffeine at 10 microgram, it became uneven, disorganized, and smaller than usual. At 100 microgram, the ability of web weaving went down the toilet altogether. On marijuana, it seemed like they tried to make a proper web but gave up halfway or loses its concentration. And on LSD, they surprisingly become more detailed and orderly. There are more different drugs tested on spiders, these are just to name a few. Now, a reason as to why spiders were then continued to be used for drug testing in later experiments is because spiders are cheap, produce relatively fast outcomes, and gives a good visualization of the effects of drugs. Another reason is that, sadly, spiders aren't protected by the law and isn't considered under animal cruelty because, let's face it, not many people care about spiders. Number 4. Eliciting sexual behavior in turkeys. This experiment was made out of curiosity and nothing much. It was to determine the minimal stimulus it needed to excite a turkey by Martin Shine and Edgar Hale of the University of Pennsylvania. The male turkeys apparently are not fussy at all. Give them a lifelike model and they'll be happy with them. This is when the researchers removed bit by bit parts from the turkey model until they lost interest. Tail, feet, wings gone, but still the male bird remains unfazed. Finally, the researchers left just the head of a female turkey on a stick and still, they showed interest to mate. Real severed head or model doesn't really matter. Surprisingly, they prefer a pretty face rather than a pretty body, as a headless body is less desirable. This is probably because of the way turkeys mate. They would usually enshroud the female's body and only leave the female's neck and up in its line of sight during the act of copulation, thus the excitement even from just the head on a stick. Apparently they did the same experiment with chickens and them roosters preferred the body rather than the heads. Number 3. Electric shocks and puppies. An American psychologist by the name Martin Seligman is pretty famous for his various experiments that involves electric shocks on humans or puppies. He had the obedience experiment in 1963 where he gets an actor connected to wires and on the other end, a person controlling how far they would go in shocking a living being on the basis of being instructed. His experiment proved that people will be able to kill if instructed, as the responsibility is technically not on them. Though because critics said that the subjects might have noticed that the actors were acting and that it was all just a ruse, he changed the experiment by changing the actors with puppies and instead of fake electric shocks into real ones. Let's just say his experiment and conclusion was a success as 20 out of 26 subjects pushed the shock button to the maximum voltage. Another experiment also by Seligman was the learned helplessness experiment done in 1965. Learned helplessness is when you feel like you can't control a bad situation and end up just giving up and accepting your fate. He wanted to expand an old experiment by Pavlov that made dogs salivate with the sound of the bell. But his experiment involved a bell and electric shocks instead of food. He strapped the dogs with a harness to stop them from escaping, and every time he rang the bell, an electric shock was given. After conditioning the dog, he puts each dog into a bigger box which was divided in the center with a small fence where one side would shock the dogs while the other would be safe. So putting the dog inside, they rang the bell, but the dogs only cowered and braced itself even after a real shock was done. While when dogs that was never conditioned got zapped, it would jump the fence to escape. Thus, learned helplessness is a psychological problem even humans have. Number 2. The Two-Headed Dog. This is the famous now unethical experiment done by a Soviet scientist named Vladimir Demikov in the 1950s. This experiment involved 2 dogs and making them into one, well, a dog with 2 heads to be precise. Demikov grafted the head, shoulders, and front legs of a puppy onto the neck of an adult dog. He connected the blood vessels in a way that the adult dog's heart would be enough to pump blood for both the dogs. But they left the esophageal tube of the puppy unconnected to anything except the outside. The surgery was quite a success. Both dogs were alive after the surgery. The puppy yawned when it woke up, and the big dog was confused and tried to shake it off. Both dogs maintained their own personality, where the puppy were feisty and playful, while the older dog just seemed unamused. It's interesting how when the big dog got thirsty, the puppy would also get thirsty even without its esophageal tube connected to the rest of its alimentary tract. So the milk they fed the dogs could be seen dribbling from it. Over the course of 15 years, Demikov made a total of 20 of the two-headed dogs. None of them lived long because of tissue rejection, but the longest ever recorded was just a month. The first ever recorded two-headed dog only survived for 6 days. But because of this surgical experiment, it expanded the surgical techniques and medicine of the possibility of transplanting between humans, such as the heart and lung transplants. Number 1. Mother? Would you choose a fluffy blanket that does nothing or a cold steel fence that feeds you? This is technically what was done on infant rhesus monkeys as a psychological experiment. Dr. Harry Harlow, a psychologist, was quite an unsympathetic person and is famous for his monkey-love psychological experiments. He subjected a lot of experiments on different monkeys which were all separated from their biological mothers from birth. The most famous experiment is the one where the monkeys were given 2 inanimate surrogate mothers. One was made from bare wires and the other was covered in cloth. He presented the infants with the surrogates under different conditions. Condition 1 had the wire mother holding a bottle of food and the cloth mother remained stationary doing nothing, while Condition 2 had the cloth mother holding the bottle while the wire mother does nothing. Either condition showed an overwhelming result where the infant macaques preferred to cling on the cloth mother no matter if it provided food or not. When subjected to fear if the surrogate mother is not present, the macaques would be so afraid they would be paralyzed, avoid the source of their fear, huddle into a ball and start sucking their thumbs. But if a surrogate mother is present, the macaques shows less fear and would show more courage to explore and even attack the source of its fear. Dr. Harlow did a lot of experiments with different conditions on different infant macaques. There's another one that's pretty sad for the macaques. It involved the macaques to be isolated in darkness for up to 1 year, either from birth or repetitively from their peers. They found out having less social contact gets the monkeys to be severely psychologically disturbed and depressed. His aim with the experiments were to prove that the psychology between an infant's love and needs and the feeling of attachment and loss. Of course he used monkeys, but he used it as a base that humans would act the same way in terms of separating children from their mothers, and proves how contact comfort is important for the psychological development and health of infant monkeys and children. Also, yes, it was highly controversial and now definitely deemed unethical.